The Indigenous Podcast.
Imagine going to a museum or going to school and going into your history class and seeing artifacts and all sorts of things, including bones, remnants of people, only to find out that they're related to you. How would you feel about that? Today, we're going to actually talk about something connected to this. I'm Pastor Crespo. Welcome to the Indigenous Podcast. I'm here with my partner, Pastor Effer. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, he will become a pastor one day.
That's right.
Yeah. But by the way, I'm doing good. I'm Pastor Refer. Miguel, how are you today?
I'm doing great.
That's wonderful. I'm so excited with our this topic today, repatriation. And with that, we have a guest that can really tell about something about this repatriation of our native tribe. Ray, how are you doing today?
Hey, good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to the podcast.
Yeah,
Tell us about yourself.
Yeah.
Well, I since 1976, I was chosen to be a representative of the Oneida Indian Nation through our traditional process, our clan system. And I've also, since that time, become the chief operating officer for the nation for economic development for the nation. So that's what I've been doing since 1976.
Wow, that's 76, 25. That's 51 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not, well, a little bit of history. Back in the 30s, the U.S. government had difficulty dealing with Indian nations because they had traditional systems of governance. So they didn't always understand how decisions were made or when they would be made or would they be formally recorded. So they passed an act called the Indian Reorganization Act that gave Indian nations the option of being able to establish and organize their nations under a Robert's Rules of Order.
Okay.
And a lot of Indian nations decided to do that. Most Indian nations in the country decided to
Go with that.
Call them elective systems.
Okay.
Wow.
And the traditional systems, a lot of Native people didn't want to do that. Our people, our nation, the Oneida Indian Nation, decided not to reorganize or depart from the traditional system as a number of Indian nations, but we're in the minority. So we still have, in other words, then we still have a clan system. We make our decisions through a clan system. We have the wolf, the bear, and the turtle clan. We have a council house, where our governmental and traditional ceremonial meeting place is. And since that time, we've still been following our traditional ways, as other Indian nations in this state have.
That's wonderful.
And a lot of Indian nations across the country have dual. Some never wanted to depart from their traditional systems, and so some will have a traditional system and some will have an elective system. And typically the elective system is the one that sort of is recognized by the U.S. government, and the government works with them, does programming, government programs, grants and such, usually with the elective system, because they understand it. They make resolutions like a typical organization does, and they document, and they have a way that they can understand how that governance, those governing decisions are made. Whereas traditional systems, sometimes they'll just announce a decision. So it's a bit more of a story, but essentially you have in this nation a lot of, there's still tradition that is being followed, but there are elective systems too. And sometimes they're in conflict with each other. Sometimes they have a real physical conflict.
Yeah, it can get complicated. Yeah.
Not long ago, up in North and Mohawk country, the traditional system got in a conflict with the elective systems, and it's not uncommon.
Yeah.
But Native people are trying to adhere to their tradition and their culture. They believe that is instructions from the Creator, and that they shouldn't vary from it.
Wow.
If they vary from it, that things aren't going to go well.
So if someone is from the outside, we're the Indigenous podcast, we're about Indigenous life, culture, people. But let's say someone has no knowledge of anything like this.
Yeah.
If I was to describe your position, is it similar? Would it be fair to say it's similar to being the president of a nation and the CEO as well? or the face, the one that people that you represent them outside of the nation?
Or one of the elder?
I'm really just a spokesman for the nation.
Oh.
Okay.
We share. We have a council of men, and we share the responsibility for decision making for the governance.
Mhm.
They have me go out and sort of be the face of the nation.
I see. Okay.
So
Okay.
in a way, it fulfills like what a president does. Like you have a president,
Yeah.
and they represent to other nations your nation.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's similar to that.
Wow.
So you have the bully pulpit, so to speak.
Yeah, I do for quite some time.
Yeah. Wonderful, wonderful. Well, can you tell a little bit about your role in? So it's been about 51 years, if I'm doing the math right. Well, about 50 years.
Yeah.
So, what are some of the things that your position, you had the opportunity to do for your people?
Well, we were the Oneida Indian Nation. Let me tell you a little bit about our nation. So, the Oneida Indian Nation, back during the early formation of this country, decided to ally with the colonists in the Revolutionary War. The Revolutionary War was a fight between, we viewed it as a fight between brothers, the colonists and England. So they rebelled against England, which was their king, and we thought we didn't want to get involved. And we tried our best not to. But we're right in the middle of the conflict. We live right here in the middle of the colonial conflict. So we decided to stay loyal to the colonists. And that was some of our Indian brothers decided to ally with the British. So that was a very difficult time for us. Obviously, the U.S. Was successful. The colonial government was successful in that conflict. And, we were friends with George Washington. We helped feed in Valley Forge, in the winter of Valley Forge, a horrendous winter. We hiked with corn from up in this area to Valley Forge in the middle of winter to help feed George Washington's starving army.
Wow.
And they were so hungry that they tried to eat the corn raw, but that would have killed them because raw corn with water, liquid would swell.
Oh,
wow.
And would kill you.
Okay.
So a woman named Polly Cooper, one of our Native women, stayed and helped through the campaign, helped them show them how to prepare the corn, rest corn soup, and we still have corn soup at all our ceremonies.
Yeah.
Corn is very important. We call it the sustainer of life. See, corn is an unusual vegetable because it multiplies itself. One kernel of corn, the whole plant will multiply itself so much more, hundredfold. So after the campaign, Martha Washington took Polly to Philadelphia and bought her a bonnet and a shawl, and because she refused to be paid, she wouldn't. She said it was her duty to do this. And how many people refused to be paid? Especially in those days, right?
Right.
So this is just a little bit of our history. So it was a great conflict. After the war, we were particularly recognized and rewarded in treaties. The Treaty of Canandaigua, 1794, is the oldest still recognized as valid treaty by the United States of America. It's in the National Archives. It's still a valid treaty.
Yeah.
Since 1794, we obtained treaty cloth from the United States every year. Imagine this, since 1794, every year someone in the government goes and purchases cloth in fulfillment of that treaty, and we get that every year.
Wow.
So my grandmother said to always go and get the cloth, no matter if it gets the size of a postage stamp.
Well, I wanted to ask you that because I heard a rumor that, the treaty is being honored, but it seems like every so often that cloth gets less and less and less. Is that a myth, or is that is that true?
That's true, because a certain amount of money was allocated with no inflationary provision. So the amount of money is the same, but it buys less and less cloth.
Yeah.
So that's how the cloth is getting smaller.
Interesting.
Yeah. Wow.
That treaty recognized our treaty boundaries, our treaty reservation, certain other provisions, and through the years, my grandmother and before her, every succeeding generation appealed to the government to protect our lands, to make sure our lands provided, but we lost our lands. And back in 76, when I came back we were reduced to 32 acres of land.
Wow.
So we lost all of that land. See, it was
32
30,
acres.
32 acres.
32 acres, right?
Yeah.
And that was when I got involved with the nation. That was the struggle. It was land claims. It was trying to get land back to our people. And that was my grandmother's goal.
Mhm.
That was my mother's goal. That was our goal when I came back. And land, you can hardly be a nation. You can hardly have
Yeah.
your community, your
Of
life
course.
without land.
Yeah.
And so that was the most important part of it. I just added myself, and I can tell you more. It's a long story.
Yeah.
I can go for a long time.
But so 50
But-
years has been really, that's one of the main things you dealt with when you got back, when you got into office.
Exactly. It was to try to get our people established on our land so we could have our nation back, so we could have our community back, so we can have our people back together.
So just a question on that, with respect to trying to, grow, get back the land. How did that happen? Was it through court rulings or purchasing land back? How did that happen?
Well, in a number of ways. At that time, it was through the courts. We didn't have. There's a lot of things that happened, but when we went into court, we were challenged about who were these people. People didn't even hear of the nation, and we were ignored for so many years. Matter of fact, my great grandfather, my grandmother wrote letters to Washington asking them about our land. We have rights to land. We have treaties. We have, and they were ignored. As a matter of fact, so many letters were written that the federal government questioned the sanity of my ancestors writing these letters.
Wow.
Because they just wouldn't stop.
Persistent.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And so we began, a court process was begun. We met with success. We went to the Supreme Court several times, 3-4 times. And so for a time, we were being successful in court, and one of our lawyers would take a legal pad, put a 1 on the end and zeros all the way down the legal pad and say, this is how much money you're going to get, which wasn't a good thing really, because it really, it just makes people think about the wrong thing.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
about the land. The money wasn't important. Now, money's important, but the most important part of this was trying to get land back to our people to have a home.
Yeah. Yeah.
So back then, there was a lot of tension in the community. A lot of the attorneys would tell all the non-native landowners around us that the Indians are coming to take your home. They're going to take your home. You had this farm for 150 years. Now the Indians are going to take it from you. So what did that happen? They hated us.
Oh.
The people around us disliked us. There was a lot of animosity, and that culminated in a fire in 1976 where my Uncle burned to death and the city refused to send the fire department.
Oh,
That's how
yeah, yeah.
bad tensions.
I heard about that.
That's how bad things
Yeah.
are.
Yeah. Well, you've come a long way. You've been faithful in your love for your people and fighting in the sense of just looking after the needs of your people. So that's amazing. So just a question before we move on.
Yeah.
How many acres currently does the Oneida Nation lay claim to in terms of that you have control of now? You started with 32. Now, how many acres is it?
We have about somewhere north of 18,000.
18,000. Wow.
Is
And-
that a random places or
Yeah.
just whole?
Well, initially we bought land in different places. We bought land from willing sellers. We came up with the idea that that if this land indeed was ours, and according to treaty it was, that was a treaty. George Washington signed the Treaty of Canandaigua, 1790. So we thought, well, we're not going to sue ourselves. So what if we just bought the land back?
Yeah.
Well, it really started just a little bit earlier than that. After the fire, it occurred to me that, what is going to make our situation help our situation? And at first I thought, well, we had a fire, we had a tragedy. Probably we'd get a lot of sympathy. People are going to say, well, let's see if we can help the Indians and wealthy people. And I was thinking and then I occurred to me, well, what if we were the wealthy? What if we were the people who had the resources?
Yeah.
We wouldn't have to go out with our hands out. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I'm just saying, wouldn't it be great if we were in control of our own ability to develop?
Yes.
And so that's how we started economic development. And we started creating the mechanism and we used all the existing laws to help us achieve that. And we researched and we fought for that. Interestingly, we started a bingo hall. Now, the number one priority for us at the time was fire protection, because we were living in trailers that were given to us from the federal government. They were Johnstown, Pennsylvania. They're always having floods.
Yeah.
So the government's always coming in with temporary housing trailers, and they had extra trailers. I said, what are we going to do with the extra trailers? Well, let's see if the Oneidas Indians want them.
Yeah.
So we took them because we had this 32 acres of land and no housing.
Yeah.
So we took the trailers so we sprouted 30 trailers eventually came, and I lived in one of them and other people. And that's how trailers came to, but trailers are notorious for flammability.
The quality of construction.
It was just, they burn up. And that's how my aunt and uncle, they didn't have electricity, so they had candles, and then they fired and did the fire, and it was a horrible tragedy.
Yeah.
So our first goal was to do fire protection, and a lot of the volunteer fire departments in the state of New York do bingos and casino nights. So we said, well, we need a fire group. We had a group, got our guys together to create our own fire department. And we said, well, let's do that then. Let's do bingo. We'll raise money. So we started to do bingo. I was the first bingo caller. We had a little wooden ball, wooden balls, and we'd roll a little cage. We're doing bingo.
Yeah.
And the city local district attorney decided to issue warrants for my arrest and others for operating bingo without a license.
Wow.
I didn't even know that was a thing.
Yeah.
They believe me, when people don't like you, they can find all kinds of ways to do things. And so our bingo shut down, but interestingly, the Seminole Indians in Florida were approached by investors. Now, bingo was thought to be an older people's game. And where do people go to? A lot of people go to retire.
Yes.
And so they said, this is the place to do bingo.
Yeah.
And so they were financed. They had the the wherewithal to challenge the shutdown. So the Seminoles started a bingo operation. They copied what we had done. And they heard about us. Some investors approached them and financed their bingo operation, and they won the case. I went all the way to the Supreme Court. Still good law. Indian nations can do what states do. What state law permits, Indian nations have enough sovereignty to do the same thing without state approval.
Okay.
So that's how we can do bingo.
Okay.
It's called Class 2 gaming. We can do bingo without the state interference.
Wow.
So then it came all full circle back to us, and we started bingo again. And then Indians started doing other forms of gambling other than bingo. They did casinos, and some of the volunteer fire departments do casino nights too. So then there was another Supreme Court case, and they allowed them to do casino nights. But they basically said if the states are doing an activity, Indian nations have enough sovereignty to regulate it without state interference. So if a state has gambling, then the Indian nations can do that. But if they don't, then they can't. And it's a distinction between activity that the states already do versus activities that are prohibited. So anyway, the states got all upset because they said the Indians are doing all this gambling and we're not getting any revenue. So they went to Congress and passed the 1988 Indian Gaming Regulatory Act. That act said that if an Indian nation wants to do gambling in a state, not Class 2, which is bingo and such, but casino-type gambling, they need to enter into a negotiation with the state. And under that negotiation, they create a compact which allows for that gaming. And the Pequot Nation was the first to do that. And part of their inducement for the state to agree to allow them to do that, they shared 25% of their slot revenue.
Wow.
Now, not everybody agrees with that.
Yeah.
The Indian Gaming Regulatory Act doesn't require that, but they did that to try to get the state to go along, which they did.
Right.
And then generally, that's the general application throughout the nation, that 25% of slot revenue is in a compact.
That's
So-
yearly.
So
Yes.
Wow.
you've been the face of the nation through all that history.
Yeah, through all that history, all the presidents, I got to meet a few.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we've had our not so good times, and we've had our conflicts and our issues and our controversies,
yeah.
and it's been a struggle internally as well as externally. And in 2013, we had a settlement with the state of New York, which is unprecedented. We're the only Indian nation in the country that has resolved all of our outstanding issues with the state and local counties.
Wow.
Who was the governor at the time? Was it Cuomo?
Andrew Cuomo
Yeah,
at the time.
okay.
And interestingly, his father, Mario Cuomo, was the governor under which we negotiated a compact to do gaming,
Wow.
which provided those resources that enabled us to have the influence and the ability to build and grow and develop.
Right.
And his son, Andrew, we were able to conclude the 2013 settlement agreement. So under that agreement, what happened in court, the Supreme Court decided what's called a new form of latches, which is a defense against Indian land claims or claims to real property like we had, and said that because we as an Indian nation hadn't occupied this land for so long, that we could not then reclaim the land and become reservation. So that basically ended our land claims
Okay.
throughout the country for other Indian nations as well. And so that's why we had to negotiate a settlement agreement, under which one of the provisions of that agreement is we ended all our tax disputes, there's jurisdictional disputes, and our land disputes.
Yeah.
So we are allowed to, we agreed that we would acquire so much land and then no more. So
It's incredible.
it's a lot of land. We'll have about 27,000 acres when we're done.
Yeah.
Wow.
About nearly another 10,000 acres of land. That's a lot of land.
Well, but it's not compared to when you look at some of the old maps. You see from the tip of Maine all the way down
Yeah.
past Pennsylvania.
So I have a question.
Well, just so you know, we've acquired enough land back. We haven't held this much land in our possession since the early 1800s.
Wow.
Wow. Yeah.
So
Right.
In your old thing before the colonial, do you guys have like boundary? Hey, this is for the Oneida Nation tribe, and you another tribe. Do you have boundaries?
Oh yeah, we did.
Do you have maps, something like that?
Well, yeah. Oh yeah, we have. There's plenty of maps.
Wow.
Well, and under the Treaty of Canandaigua, 1794, there's defined distinct boundaries. And land, we agreed, and for us, wasn't enough. We wanted to acquire lands that were within our original boundaries.
Okay.
So within our original reservation. So that's all our land that we're acquiring is within that reservation.
Wow. To follow up that question, Ray, I understand that Oneida before the colonization is reached until Canada. So there are Canadian Oneida, right? So part of the purchasing of your land also in Canada or only in the United States?
Just in the United States.
Oh, okay.
The people went to Canada. Back in the 1800s, our people were falling on hard times. We were starving. We were not treated well. And there were stories of our people going down to the docks and scraping the flour that spilled from the flour sacks for food. And unfortunately, so a lot of our people decided that they will go someplace else. And a large group sold the land here that they had and moved to Canada.
Okay.
And some went to Wisconsin. So there are two large settlements in Wisconsin and Canada. And they've been there since probably 175 years or so.
Wow.
Ray, Pastor Efra and I have had conversations about this. I have a great appreciation for Indigenous history, here in the U.S. because, we both can claim
Yeah.
it being indigenous where we're from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But me growing up, I didn't have that connection. I didn't have that connection to my past. And Efra, I don't know your situation.
I have a little bit connection.
Yeah, I did not, which is a whole nother story for another time. But I love history. I love listening to these things, and so it's just amazing. We're here to talk about a specific situation, an event. In December of 2024, I just want to bring up this picture here. This event took place. Whoops, not that one. I think it's this one. There we go. That event took place, and this is what we wanted to talk to you about today.
Yeah.
And this was a signing. I believe that's the president of Colgate University, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, that's right.
Can you tell us a little bit about this? Because this is really the meat. This is the reason why we're here today.
Okay, well, certainly. Throughout the years, our people have been studied. The Haudenosaunee people were part of the Haudenosaunee, the Six Nations, the Oneida Nation, one of the founding members. And throughout our history, we've been studied by their colonizers, the immigrants who came here and developed this country and their nation, the colonies. And our people had a form of government that was admired and studied by Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, John Adams. We actually, our people, our leaders, went to the colonial leaders, Albany Congress, 1784, and other times where our people told them that they that the Six Nations were bound together by this great law of peace. And it was an organization of nations treating each other as equal nations and working together. Now, that was the first example of nations working together. Usually nations conquered nations, Rome conquered nations. All these different, it was always conquest and conquer.
Yes.
And this was an agreement where everybody treated each other equally. And they told the 13 colonies, that they need to do the same thing. Instead of one colony trying to be above everybody else, everybody treat each other equally and you'd be stronger. And they took an arrow and broke one arrow and showed how you could break it easily. And then they took 6 arrows and showed how strong that was.
Wow.
That's where that comes from. And so that form of government was something that they modeled and they copied, and that, people don't always like to recognize that, but that was part of our history. And what else did you want to?
Well, the meeting that took place, there was a purpose for it.
Okay, there's so much to history.
I know.
Anyway, we were studied. Our people, of course, have lived here since time immemorial. So through the development of this country, universities, museums, as they study, and as colonial homes were being built and settlements were being made, a lot of our graves, a lot of our things were found, were buried, they were discovered, they were analyzed, they were put in museums. And so late in 1990, there was the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act passed in 1990. And
NAGPRA, right?
NAGPRA.
NAGPRA, yeah.
Right, NAGPRA. And for about 20 or so years, actually longer, nothing much really happened. And it was intended to right the wrongs, as you mentioned earlier, of the past, of all of this grave robbing and selling items that were essentially sacred to Native people, and it would be sacred to any people.
Yes.
And so they wanted to try to correct that and get all of these funerary objects and bones and skeletons, and they were being studied. For the age, some of the bones are being pulverized for some of this carbon testing, and so it was just a tragedy, a travesty. So, but nothing much happened. And recently, in the last couple of years, with the past administration, they put what had happened is there's a couple of reasons for it. One is that a lot of the Native people didn't have don't have the resources to sort of monitor the Federal Register
Yeah.
and to go out. They're lucky just to be surviving. And there was also provision where you had to prove that these items really belonged to you.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a lot of these items were taken 200 years ago. I mean,
Yeah.
who's got the chain of title? I mean, it's sort of ridiculous, but it was just a loophole where these institutions could just sit there and have all these items and say, well, unless you prove to me these belong to you, we're going to keep them.
So did they actually? They were mostly in schools, colleges,
museums.
So were they
museums and universities? Both. And all.
So they actually fought against
private,
you, though.
And private. Well, I wouldn't. They just had a convenient loophole. I mean, these are assets to them.
Okay.
If you're an anthropologist, this is your textbook. All these graves and all these digging. This is all exciting to you, so you don't want to give that up.
Mm-hmm.
And also, it's part of their study at a university. They have an anthropological study, so
PhD,
they need all
doctoral.
this stuff in the case, and they need to be digging things up, and so it's not unusual. But the fact that but recently they put different teeth into the act by saying that they had to recognize the oral history of the nations, and so that changed a lot.
Wow.
And since our time, and I wanted to be sure I had it all accurate, but in the last years since the act, we've worked with 13 institutions to repatriate over 90 of our ancestors and over 4,500 funerary objects. And by the end of this year, there'll be a total of 15 institutions. And by the end of this year, or by the end of we'll have a total of 15 institutions and repatriate over 120 ancestors and over 9,500 associated funerary objects.
Can you define just what's a funerary object? Is it just the remains of the bodies of Native Americans, or is it the
it's cultural associated items that were important and sacred to the funeral?
So it's not just
not just the body.
No,
the
there could
remains.
be necklaces, it could be pipes, it could be other objects that were part of the funerary ceremony, and they're considered sacred to the culture of our people.
Now, just for the sake of, again, I'm thinking of somebody that's watching. If you're not sensing like, what's the big deal? Because I think, especially, I don't know, in American schools, I've been to schools where they have relics and things of the past.
Yes, yes.
Imagine if your family has been buried in a funeral home, or not a funeral home, a cemetery, excuse me. And then one day you find out that somebody was digging and they found a bunch of stuff and bodies, and they decided to take them and show them for an exhibit. Their jewelry they were buried with, their clothes they were buried with, their bones. How would you feel about that? That would be pretty bad.
And here's the thing, Ray. You reminded me of what happened with the ancient times when the colonizers, the British, went to Egypt and they dig those Tutankhamun thing, those remains over there. And those are sacred because Egyptians believe that their king is their god. And, these robbers, they just dig in there. And probably British will kill me with this, but you can see the remains of pharaohs over there in London Museum.
Right.
Right.
And see, it's important that it goes to a lot of sort of different things, but essentially it's dehumanization of our people. And it's sometimes a struggle for our people to be recognized almost as an equally human basis that other people are. To treat our ancestors like relics or something to be studied is a dehumanization. It's just as you say. It would be such an outrage if anybody went to a cemetery and started digging up some bones that I got to study these people. But
then putting a house on it.
It's significant because, and that's why sometimes people wonder why some of the efforts we make, like to change the Washington team name, that's a dehumanization. We tried, it was a slur. It was something that was dehumanizing to our people. So we had to make an effort to change it. Fortunately, we were successful. that wasn't easy to do. I mean,
Yeah.
we take on the NFL; they're a multi-billion-dollar industry. They have all the resources. It's one of the billionaire playgrounds,
Mhm.
and those people don't like anybody telling them what to do in this country.
Yeah.
So, so we were fortunate, but it was all an effort for people to realize that we are humans,
Yeah.
and that we live here, and we're not relics. We're not just museum items,
Yes.
and we're people with families and grandfathers and grandchildren.
Yeah.
I think the history of well, in this case, the history that they teach in schools. We need to know there's more to it than just the history that you read about. And I had a saying I was sharing with Effer that so the majority writes the history, the indigenous have lived it.
Yeah. Another thing that I would like to add, we are both pastors here. And I remember in the book of Genesis, when the father of Joseph migrated to Egypt, he said, Jacob said to his son Joseph, if I die, bring my body
Bones.
back to
Bring my
where I
bones
came
back.
from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And another thing, when the Egyptian had crossed to the Red Sea, Moses had taken the body of Joseph
Yeah.
with them.
Yeah.
So those remains are sacred. You cannot just
Yeah.
display it somewhere there.
Yep. Yep.
You know?
Yeah, it's really that's interesting to hear.
Yeah.
And I believe that, and every people have a right to protect their elders and the people who've gone before
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
We call them
Yeah.
our grandfathers and our grandmothers,
Mhm.
and that is so sacred to us, and it goes back thousands of years.
Yeah.
And with all people,
Yeah.
all people have this, and I think that's why it's so important to do a podcast like this,
Yes.
so that people will understand and know you as a human being,
Mhm.
and not
So-
just something to be studied.
So, question. Well, I don't know, maybe two questions at one time. Do you have an idea of how old some of the remains are that you've received? I mean, how far do they go back? And the question that I had was the remains that you had received, for example, in that photo at Colgate University, were they just for the Oneidas, or were they able to do DNA and say, well, these are different tribes? I mean, how extensive was that research into what you're getting back?
Well, some of it is spotty because some of it were private collectors, people who just dug things up and then donated it to a museum. Very often that happened. Farmers were plowing and they discovered something. It's not unusual, but they're typically, they have recognized boundaries of the Oneida Nation and the Onondaga Nation and the Mohawk and the others. And if an item was taken, the history will tell you where it came from. So-and-so's farm over here, they'll know it's within a certain boundary, so they will presume that it's
So the geographical boundaries.
geographical boundaries.
Okay.
And will generally tell you
Okay.
where they come from.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Well, so
I get another part of that question.
well, how old were they?
Oh, how old?
Yeah.
Well, however they carbon date or whatever they do, we
Yeah.
don't really know. It's since time immemorial.
Really?
They've
Yeah.
been there.
Yeah.
Wow.
And we say we walk on the dust of our ancestors for thousands of
Yeah.
years.
Yeah.
Yeah. And to follow up that question, are they just Oneida, or there are also another tribe that
We
involved?
presume they're Oneida or whatever tribe it is, based on the geographical
Oh, okay.
place
Okay.
that it was located, unless there's other information available.
Well, and I think the question, the reason that is so I was looking online, the news. There wasn't a lot of news that I could find on this in the mainstream, quote unquote, mainstream media. But when I did, you were the one in the picture.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, are there any other tribal leaders, representatives from other nations that have been as involved in this as you have? Or has this been really something that's happened more in the Northeast than in other parts of the country?
Well, a lot of natives are at a disadvantage. We have the resources to have the archivists and historians and others to research and monitor and find potential places where our ancestors may have been.
Okay.
Some other tribal nations don't have any of those kinds of resources.
I see.
So they're very
Okay.
limited in what they're able to do. We're probably a little bit more out there because we have those resources.
Okay.
But it's as important to everyone in the nation. I remember traveling to Germany And Germany really is an interesting history. They have an author, Karl May, who was an author that wrote books about Native American experience and the settlers, but he wrote them from a different perspective. He wrote them from the perspective of the Native people being heroic and patriotic,
Wow.
and not put in the position where they're being attacked and they're attacking wagon trains. And as a result,
the typical thing they did on Westerns.
Yeah.
So a lot of the German people actually grew up learning about Indians in a different light. So I've been over there to some of they have Karl May Festival, and they really look to the Indians in a different way of different light. And,
Yes.
and it was really fascinating. And they have a Karl May where he lived. He lived in a place, Radebeul, and he has a house. There's a house there, and they have a Karl May museum. Now it's a real. It's sort of a mom and pop kind of situation, but it's a fantastic collection. He's got a fantastic collection. He did travel through America. He actually wrote these books. He had not traveled to America. He just sort of wrote these stories.
Research.
And so then he did come to America, and he did collect a lot of items, and a lot of them were over there. And there were some Native people who were trying to get repatriated some of their ancestors from there. And so we were able to talk to the museum and get them to do that. And they hadn't had any luck, but they did. They were finally able to do that.
Wow.
We even have a museum in Japan that's contacted us with a potential Oneida item. And so that's the reason we're doing this. And it's important to create the kind of momentum for institutions to get on board and start repatriating these items. I know they'd like to keep them. Who wouldn't? But it's important to understand the humanity of Native people and how important and sacred these items are. These people and these items need to come home, be where they belong. Just like you described from the scriptures, the Bible, how they have that feeling.
Yes.
They want to come. They want to be home. They want to be with their people.
You use the word dehumanizing, and I find that to be an interesting word. I don't hear that word used very often.
Yeah.
But the things that we take as normal history, TV shows, Westerns, the views. We used to play cowboys and Indians and banks and cops and robbers when I was a kid.
Yeah.
If you wanted to be a robber, because that was the cool thing, that was the rebel thing. But when it came to cowboys and Indians, we wanted to be the Indians because they were quote unquote the rebels and bad guys. You don't realize the
real history.
Well, it's just wrong. It's just I mean, it's what you're saying about people. I don't want to use the word racism. That's not the right word, but at least in my mind, it's just you have you're stereotyping people. It's just
it's happened for many years. When Columbus first came to this country, the Catholic Church was really influential in the world.
Yeah.
And he wrote back to Spain, and he when he first came to the islands and he saw the Indians there, Arawak Indians, he wasn't sure. Like at the time, if you were in Britain, you couldn't just travel over to France and discover France. There are people living there. French people. Somebody's going to you're going to have a fight.
Yeah.
And so when they came to this country, they saw these Indians, and they're going, "Well, how can we discover this place? There's people here. There's somebody living here." So he had to write back, and he did. To the leadership of the church, and asked them, "Well, what is the classification of these people? Well, are they people, or they're not like us? They don't have ships and boats and clothes, and formalities.
They're
like
not civilized,
kings and queens." And they in the church told them, "Well, they're above the animals, but they're not human. They're not considered human.
Not like them.
They're not like them." So what that meant is because they were not human, you could kill them.
Wow.
You could violate the commandment that says thou shalt not kill, because they're not really human.
Yeah.
They're just above. So they considered it blank land.
Right.
They had some Latin inscription.
Yeah.
And that said it was like blank land. So then Columbus and his soldiers, and they knew that the Indians were so mild they could easily kill them, conquer them, make them do whatever they want.
Yeah.
And they did. And, rape was not a rape because they're not,
Yeah.
They're not humans for them.
I'm just telling you
Yeah.
the reality.
Yeah.
The reality of what was going on. That's why not everybody considers Columbus a hero.
Mhm.
So these things occurred, unfortunately. I think Native people have been trying to get the Catholic Church to change some of their positions throughout history. And what does it mean for them to apologize? Well, probably not a lot in a way, but not symbolically. It does mean something because they recognize the humanity of the people. They were in fact human.
Yeah.
They were in fact people who had souls. But that was part of, unfortunately, that cleared the path for them to come in and slaughter and kill and take whatever they wanted without impunity.
I tell you, there's a lot of history that people don't realize is out there.
Yeah.
And it's hard sometimes to maybe empathize when you hear things because you don't understand why you do what you do.
Well, I think that's why I do these kinds of things, is because to have people remember and think about how things that are done, mascotry and using things can affect the people that you don't realize sometimes that these are real people. These are people that are still alive, that still have families, that still have children. And I do this because I have children. I never thought much about this when I grew up. I didn't live on the reservation when I did for a while. But when I was going to school, I didn't think much about it until I became a leader of the nation.
Yeah.
And then I started thinking, and we're taught to think in terms of what effect our decisions have on the seventh generation of the future. So when I looked at the Washington team and the name, which is a defined slur, it's not everything native that's native is disrespectful, but it was a defined slur. And as a result, our people were being slurred every week on national television.
Wow.
So that made that an important issue for us. And I never quite honestly thought we were going to beat a billionaire group of people. And also the insensitivity of some people. They don't care. They don't care who they're hurting as long as they get to party and have chicken wings and pizza.
Right. The general person does. They grew up with the name.
But and I knew people weren't going to be happy about it, and some Native people didn't like it. They liked it too. They liked the thinking that, well, it's a sign of honor or respect. No, it's not. It's defined in the language. It's like going to someone saying, "I am going to insult you now purposely." Not accidentally.
Yeah, the Washington Wetbacks. If they had a name for a group like that, I don't know. I think
Well, you can just you can come up with 100 variations that everybody would, the Jews or the blacks. You could insult people easily. Well, we now know how important respect is.
Yes.
Respect is very important.
Very important.
Everywhere. It's probably, in some places like prisons, it's probably one of the highest forms of capital you have.
Yeah.
And so we need to, we know now, and I think most people do recognize how important respect is for other people. Look at the world we live in. It's easy to disrespect people.
Yes.
And it's easy to find out how that can have long-lasting effects. And you can have an immediate conflict, or you can have a years-long conflict by being disrespectful.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Ray, just some more questions here before we kind of end the podcast, but I don't know if you're interested in naming names, but I'm just wondering in this pursuit to receive these remains, have you had any school or museum just flat out say, we don't want to talk about it? Or can you not, or is it wise just not to say anything at this point?
No. It's quite all right. They're much more sophisticated than that. They know how to say no without. And for a long time, they didn't have. If you take the position, you prove to me that these are yours before I give them back to you. There's almost nothing going back.
Wow.
But that changed. Undersecretary of Interior Holland, Deb Holland.
Mm-hmm.
She changed those requirements under NAGPRA, and now a lot of that is coming back. These museums are given a year to identify remains that should potentially go back to, that are funerary items. They no longer can ignore oral history, and and so we've gotten a lot more returned items and a lot more that are coming back. But no institution that we've experienced, and I'm saying it has not happened, but none that we've experienced has really been blatantly objectionable.
Okay. Just what do you do when you receive what do you do with those remains? Because they're not being displayed. You're taking care of them in a respectful way. Are you burying them again? Do you have a specific place for, like, is there a specific cemetery?
Yes.
For
that? The answer is yes. We have part of our burial grounds that we have for contemporary funerals, and then we have an item for repatriated remains.
Okay.
So we go through a ceremony of reinterring these remains back into where they belong, back with our in our home.
Wow.
That's
awesome.
Last question. What are other areas that there's an active movement to, I'm going to say, quote unquote, right or wrong, as it relates to some of the challenges? You've been a representative for 50 years, so I mean, you've seen a lot. You've been there, done that. You've looked out for your people. But I'm just curious: is there anything on the horizon, or anything beyond the repatriation of the remains? Is there anything else that's happening that maybe somebody might not? Maybe they hear something in the news and they don't know. They're hearing one side of it, but is there anything that you're working on?
Well, I think what's important from the Native perspective is their ability to control their own destiny. And that relates to sovereignty, basic sovereignty. And sovereignty for us would mean the ability to control the education of your children, to have your land, to be able to control your economic destiny, to be able to control the welfare and well-being of your people, and what direction and how you can protect your people's ability and right to educate and continue their culture and their people's the education of their children and their future. So it's all about making a better future for our children, all about thinking future generations to the head. And our history has been up and down. There's been times where there was a termination era, it's called, where the idea and the goal, for example, for dealing with the governmental policy was that Indian nations should cease to become nations. They should just meld into the larger society and be contributors to the larger society. And that failed. That failed. Native people adhere to their culture and their belief system fiercely, as anyone does, really. When you think about it, the Jewish people was a prime example. And so our goal is to protect our future and our way of life. And to do that, you have to have certain things. You have to have the ability not to be interfered with, not to have laws that tell you can't do things. There was a time when our people couldn't speak their own language. They were not allowed in the schools. The boarding school era philosophy was to kill the Indian and save the man. So that was a horrible time for our people, where some positive things happened to it out of that, but it was, I guess I would liken that system to an abusive household, where somebody could survive an abusive household, be mistreated, and still be a success.
Right.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the way it should be.
Right.
But they can still survive being abused, and for a lot of natives, they have. And there were nonetheless some bright lights along the way. There have been some native people who have survived, that have done well, and been able to survive certain abuses as native people. In a way, they're sort of like an abused people. They have, a lot of them suffer from PTSD, in my opinion. So there's a lot of healing still. There's a lot of healing, but the ability to control your own future is the most important thing, because And that's why sovereignty is so important.
Right. And that's why you fight for it so fiercely.
Yes, and you have to. Well, you have to. No one. There's no system out there that's going to teach you how to be an Oneida Indian or any kind of an Indian. You have to decide that for yourself because you learn it from your ancestors. Because nobody, you're not going to go to school and they're going to, well, okay, don't worry about it because we're going to teach you. No, they're not going to teach you. You have to self-determining what you're going to be for your people's sake. And, going into the business that we did, after the fire we had, my uncle, and, I still remember the charred remains of them and laying there. We didn't know how to take care of the bodies. We're not funeral parlors. We're not emergency services. The bodies laid there until we figured out how we going to. So we finally found a emergency service that would handle bodies.
That was when was that? 76?
76.
Yeah. Wow.
And so, we had to learn a lot of things through this world. And through that time, I decided to go back to school. I wanted to learn as much about the rules that we live under and the laws we live under. So I went back to college. I went back to law school. And I would say that it's now enabled me to be able to do things and understand things in the way that you can do things. It's equipped me better to be able to help with our people's decision making.
Wow.
And that's critical. And so that's why the economic development, when people say, well, you're doing this gaming or you're doing whatever you're doing. Yeah, well, I remember my aunt and uncle being Bernadette, their bodies there. And who's going to take care of them?
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't, for myself, I just thought we need to do something. We need to do something about it. Not go around the country with our hand out. Sure, I appreciate the people's generosity and their sympathy, but I'd rather, I don't want their sympathy. I want to do something for ourselves. I want to make this, and I believe that. I believe that when you have the ability to make a difference, then you have the responsibility to make a difference. Not just that you have that opportunity, but you also, that's accompanied by responsibility. Not everybody believes that.
Right.
A lot of people look at the past
That's very deep.
Look at the past and they're sort of mired in the past and all the wrongs of the past. I can tell you, I agree with that. I understand that, but that's not the end of the story. The rest of the story is, what do I do about it?
Right.
What do
Where do we go from
do
here?
about it?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And not everybody necessarily agrees with that, but I think, and that's why we're doing what we're doing. We're making a difference in our lives and our future because of our history, but we're doing it because we have the ability to do it.
And you know what, Ray? I like the way you said it in one of the video that I saw when you were talking about a repatriation, that you said there's no use of looking at the past, but we are judged, according to you, by what we are going to do in the future.
Yeah.
And I like that statement that you have said right there.
And I believe that. And I think, see, a lot of things that happen to our people, you don't feel good about. And it's and looking at the history, it's a sad history.
Yes.
But I don't want to be crippled by that. I don't want that to be a crutch. I want to just put that aside. I don't disagree. Like the boarding school era, I understand that. But what do we do about it now?
Yeah.
What do we do about it going forward? That's what I'm focused on.
Yes.
You can't be that inspirational to a bunch of pastors because what you're going to end up with is a sermon.
Yeah. Yes.
No, it's very, very true. I think, I don't. This is one thing I love about Native history. There's so much there. I don't necessarily have that because there's one side of my family I don't even know.
Yeah.
And so that history gone. Grandparents, I don't know anything about that. History, culture, don't know anything about that. But the idea that you cannot be crippled by your past.
Yes.
That is so powerful.
Yeah.
If more people got that they would, their lives would be better. And I'm going to remember, if you have the ability, you have the responsibility.
Yeah. I believe that.
We should put that on a bumper sticker.
I would like to add it also. That those colonizers called you guys Indians, but when the Spaniards was the colonizers of the Philippines, they called us Indios.
Oh,
Yeah. So we have the same thing in common.
yeah.
Because, like what you said, these people are above animals, so you cannot distinguish them as a human. That's why they call us Indios.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a Latin word of Indians.
And that's probably the same definition that they were using against your people. That
The
is the
same thing
same
would
thing.
happen.
The
Yeah.
same
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They were operating under that
Yeah.
sort of
Yeah.
I don't know what
Indios.
they call it from the church. The church codicils or bull. There's something like a bull.
Yeah.
A papal
Oh yeah, papal bull. Yeah,
Papal
yeah, yeah.
bull.
Papal bull.
And decided that
Very appropriate.
Yeah.
that,
They called,
that they were not human.
yeah.
Yeah.
They were above the animals,
Mhm.
but they weren't quite fully human. So
Subhuman, probably.
so certain laws,
Yeah.
certain
Yeah.
laws that weren't a sin if you
Mhm.
committed them against them,
Yeah.
which was, I think, the worst thing.
Yeah,
could-
in
they
Puerto
could come
Rico,
up
it was the Spaniards, those Europeans,
Yeah.
and they came and
Yeah.
when they went to Puerto Rico, they did the same thing. Rape, pillage,
Yes. Yes.
removed
Exactly.
from the census.
All coming from that one concept that
Yeah.
they're not really human.
Yeah.
So you can, like animals, you could just kill them. I'm lucky, I guess they suppose they didn't start eating us.
The same thing what they did in my ancestors in my
Yeah.
country.
Yeah.
And I have a little bit on it because I was there. I live by it.
yeah,
Well, I'll tell you that colonizers, in order to pillage and steal,
Mm.
have to dehumanize those people.
Right.
So they're soldiers. When you order a soldier, go
Mhm.
kill that guy, and he's a man or a woman or a child
Mm.
or a family, you've got to dehumanize them in your mind so much that you can commit that act.
Mm.
And it's a horrible
Yeah.
way to do something. But that happens in so
Yeah.
many wars.
right.
They don't, in
Wow.
all the wars, they name the enemy certain demeaning names.
Mhm.
So they dehumanize
Make it
so it's
easier.
Yeah.
easier to kill.
Yeah.
Easier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And interestingly, the resistance to kill is
Mhm.
so strong in humans.
Yeah.
And the military, the training is all to get them to
Yeah.
not to suppress that resistance to
Mm.
kill.
Yeah.
And they don't even study it
Yeah.
because a lot of the soldiers in battle, they actually don't shoot to kill.
Yes.
They're shooting over the head.
That's
They're
exactly
shoot-
right.
And they won't study it because they know it's a high percentage. They don't want people to
Right.
sort of know this.
Yeah.
But interestingly, the military has found that with the video games
Mhm.
and all the
Mm.
Call of Duty and all
Yeah.
these different killing games,
Mhm.
they're much more trainable.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
The-
Yeah. It's
the young
ingrained into
soldier-
the
yeah, it's
yeah.
sort of already in their psyche. They're
Yeah.
already accepting shooting, killing, and other
Yeah.
things.
Wow.
There's a book, I don't know if you've ever read it, On Killing.
Yeah, I read that.
Who was it? Cooper? Somebody wrote
No,
it.
it was a military.
Yeah.
but I know. Yeah, I that's
Yeah.
where I got.
Yeah,
that.
that's during the Civil War. Some of the soldiers, they would just shoot up above their head.
Yeah.
They didn't want to kill people.
Yeah.
They just didn't want
Yeah,
to do it
yeah.
for different reasons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
Well, I don't know how we got in that subject.
well, I don't know. We could be here a long time.
Yeah.
I find it interesting talking to people like you that have a
Mhm.
great history. I love your worldview. If you have the ability, you have
Mhm.
the responsibility,
Mhm.
and not being crippled by the past, because the past can cripple you,
Mhm.
whether it's a traumatic personal experience or a corporate
Yeah.
traumatic experience. And so it's something that we're doling out life advice on the Indigenous podcast. Okay, not just talking to interesting people, talking about interesting things,
Yeah.
but if we're gonna have pastors, we have to give life advice. So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
their dose for for this episode.
Yeah. And this is my last word. What I've learned from this conversation right now is forgiveness. Like what Ray said, nothing will happen. It will just live in the past.
Mm-hmm.
It's forgiveness and let's move on forward. But the question is, what can we do about it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a very significant thing you just said because it really sometimes is a challenge for Native people
Mm.
to get past the past.
Yeah.
Because and one of the reasons is because we live it every day.
Mhm.
Every day
Mhm.
we walk around on land that we know belonged to us and it was stolen.
Yes.
Every day we know certain things were done. Look, our people were allies in this. We're non-conquered people. We're allies in this country in the Revolutionary War. Why are all these wrongs still done to us when the promises were made by
Yeah.
the father of this country, George
Mhm.
Washington, the
Mhm.
man who could not tell a lie? Why aren't they fulfilling this?
Yes.
And so, and even now we've got a settlement agreement, but it's not everything we wanted, but it's satisfactory. We agreed to it.
Mm.
We weren't forced into it,
Mhm.
which was one of the best things.
Yeah.
But yet we, everyday Native people and out West and all over, they look around and they see all this development. It's not to them necessarily successful development. It's trespassing. It's stealing. It's wrong. So it's hard for them
Yes.
sometimes
Yes, it's hard.
to get past it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But they need to, though, to me, because it can become a hindrance. It can become a real crutch.
Yeah.
It can become a
Yeah.
lot of things.
Yeah.
You cannot move on.
No, well, if
Yeah.
you don't,
Yeah.
you're gonna stay in the same place you are.
Mhm.
Right? I mean,
Right.
that's the
Right.
that's the lesson of life. You can be crippled, but then you're never going to progress any further than where
Yeah.
you're at.
Mhm.
And that's just not that's a rule of life.
Mhm.
I mean, I think that's where I think this is the type of thing it's a lesson that's applicable to all of
Well,
us.
see, that's why I think when you say the word forgiveness,
Mhm.
you're doing more for yourself.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
really allowing yourself to
Yeah.
get past that.
Freedom to live your
Yes.
life.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Give
Wow.
you freedom. Yeah.
Forget and move on.
Right.
Well, Ray, thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
so
Ray.
much. I appreciate it. Effort.
Mhm.
You know,
Cool.
you and I are going down the road together with all
Yeah,
these interesting
yeah.
episodes. But
There are many interesting episodes ahead. So this is one of it. So,
Yeah.
Ray,
Well,
again, thank you so much. We appreciate
Yeah.
you.
we're gonna have you back for some other episodes. I know that you're traveling all over the world, doing a lot of things representing
Yeah.
the Oneida Nation, but we want to have you back because I know we got some interesting things we can talk
Mhm.
about.
Yeah.
Thank you for being a part of our journey today in this episode.
Yeah.
Like, share, subscribe.
Mhm.
Put this feed on your own social media site. Put the link on your own social media feeds. Let people know about the Indigenous podcast. We'll see you. We'll see you next time.